Good morning, I'm Brian Gagne, and today I'll be discussing how less economically developed countries can manage their water more sustainably so as to have more for their populations. Um, in on Earth today, we're experiencing a water crisis wherein 1 in 10 people don't have access to any clean water. And this has to do with a lot of factors, but the biggest one is money. And then right after it comes power, because we find that the most powerful countries tend to have the least problems with water. 39% of all U.S. water is used for irrigation to feed the U.S. population, and 70% of all global fresh water is used for irrigation purposes. Um, my teammates explored other solutions that can lead to an increase in the water supply, one of them being the reduction of wastewater, and the other being the reduction of urban water usage. And my solution is unique in the sense that agricultural techniques, they will reduce the amount of water we use when we optimize the techniques, such as switching to more specialized types of irrigation, but it also balances the problem of food insecurity because we're going to be able to produce more food for the less economically developed countries. And one situation where they did just that was the Bangladesh Water Development Board, because a few years ago they were faced with the problem of annual monsoonings in Bangladesh, followed by the dry spell. And what they're really trying to do is just find different ways to make sure that they can use the land year round through things like crop rotations and stuff like that. So we need to ask if it's viable when we look at the economics involved, because these are poor countries where the main type of irrigation they'll use is surface irrigation because it's the cheapest and it pretty much just has to do with flooding an area with water so that the plants can receive the water in their roots. Other types include localized irrigation, which is drip irrigation, a more expensive alternative, and there's also sub-irrigation, which is lowering the ground level so that the plant's roots can reach the water table, and spray irrigation, which is what we use mostly in America, which involves more machinery and is also expensive. But a cheap way that they've been able to extract groundwater in places like Mali and Bangladesh has been through treadle pumps that they install into the ground made of wood, which are not expensive whatsoever. They can be $25 to $30, but they're pretty much used to extract groundwater like that's very close to the surface and is very sustainable. So like I mentioned, crop rotation is a very important thing when we're gonna look at agriculture because it keeps the soil, it keeps the nutrients in the soil like high, and it reduces the amount of soil degradation. But another way we can increase how sustainable our techniques can be is by trying to reuse the water that runs off in surface irrigation. Because what tends to happen is the water can contain pesticides or fertilizers or anything that can be used to increase the yield of the crops. And then when that enters another body of water, especially fresh bodies of water, it can pollute the body. Also, when we also the reused water can't be consumed, obviously, but we can use it to put back into the environment. And when we extract less water, when we optimize the irrigation techniques, we'll be able to have more water in aquifers and use it for more important things, like giving it back to the populations. But we can't do it alone, especially if you're in a less developed country. You may not have the resources, so you need the help of your government. Our population is expected to rise to almost 10 billion by 2050 based on population models. And most governments know this, and it needs to be a main priority for them to try and make sure that they're going to be able to provide fresh food and water to the population. In Mexico, they had an agreement with NAFTA because they're supposed to supply a large amount of the fruits and vegetables for the rest of the world, but at the same time, they have a growing population, and when they try to expand agriculture, it can be a problem because at the same time, they need to help provide for the rest of the world when they need to provide for their own people. Also, this gets people involved locally, like when they get in contact with the government. So one thing that anybody can do locally to increase the amount of water in supply for those in need is to use less water, like on a daily basis. In America, you hear things like stop the drip and like things of that nature, but it's harder when you have much less water. So they might have to propose legislation which reforms the agricultural business and how they might go about using the water that they need. Also, people can personally start at a small scale producing their own crops just to reduce the demand on the industry. And at the same time, that will help stimulate their local economies through things like farmers markets and such like that. And some global steps that can be taken for all of us to help them is developed countries can go ahead and give them a hand with things like optimizing the techniques, giving them more industry, like, well, just helping them through the process, and also providing them with more sanitation, which will increase the yield of crops and it will help people like survive. The government can sometimes like the local government can sometimes get in the way of the bigger picture, such as what happened in Egypt, where a lot of the citizens they weren't okay with the idea of damming the Nile River to produce energy and more water due to their cultural ties to the Nile. And what that ended up doing is it hurts Egypt in the long run because they're one of the places that had economic water shortage, which just has to do with not being able to provide water based on monetary problems. In places like the Middle East, they have a different problem where they physically have very much less water in the area to take control of. But in Africa, it's an economic problem because they just don't have the money to transport the water. Every minute, a child dies from a water-related disease, and when we look at water problems as the population increases in size, we're only going to see death tolls increase due to starvation and lack of water. And then based on that, in poor countries, the sanitation will decrease and the overall quality of life is going to go down. And as horribly people are dying, there's also inevitably going to be tensions over water because when there's not enough resources for a growing population, there has to be competition. And this could cause threats and terrorist attacks over water and possibly even a global warfare issue. Thank you.